The morning of October 25, 1944, began the way most mornings in the Philippine Sea began. Gray water under a pale sky, the smell of fuel oil and salt, men at their stations doing the mechanical work of men who have been at war long enough to stop thinking about it between engagements. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamato and looked out at a formation that was, by any objective measure, one of the most powerful surface fleets ever assembled in the history of naval warfare. 23 warships, battleships that dwarfed anything the Americans had put to sea. Cruisers with main guns capable of splitting a destroyer in half at 12 miles. A fleet built over decades and crewed by men who had trained their entire professional lives for exactly this moment. The orders were clear. Drive through the San Bernardino Strait. Enter Leyte Gulf. Destroy the American landing fleet supporting MacArthur's invasion of the Philippines. The plan had a name, Shogo, Operation Victory. Kurita had every reason to believe it could work. The Americans had been drawn north by a decoy fleet. The strait behind him was unguarded. The path to the Gulf was open. What he did not know, standing on that bridge in the gray morning light, was that by the time the sun reached its highest point that day, he would make a decision 12 miles from his objective that no admiral before or since has ever been able to fully explain. He would turn his fleet around. He would leave the target untouched, and the Imperial Japanese Navy would never sail as a fighting force again. To understand what happened on October 25, 1944, you first have to understand what Japan was attempting, and why the attempt itself was already an admission of how badly the war had gone. By the autumn of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy had been fighting the United States for nearly 3 years. It had opened that war with the most capable carrier strike force on Earth, demonstrated at Pearl Harbor and through the early Pacific campaigns exactly what that force could do, and had then spent the following 2 years losing it engagement by engagement. Midway in June of 1942, destroyed 4 fleet carriers and their experienced air groups in a single afternoon. The Guadalcanal campaign bled the surface fleet through a grinding series of night engagements that Japan initially won and then gradually lost. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, which American aviators called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, finished Japanese naval aviation as a functioning offensive arm. In 2 days of combat, Japan lost 3 more carriers and somewhere between 600 and 700 aircraft. The pilots who died in those 2 days could not be replaced. Japan's training pipeline had never been designed to produce aviators at the rate the war was consuming them, and by the summer of 1944, it had quietly stopped trying. What remained of the Imperial Japanese Navy by October 1944 was a surface fleet of considerable individual power and almost no realistic strategic options. The battleships were still there, the guns still worked, the crews were still trained, but without air cover, a surface fleet in the modern Pacific was not a weapon. It was a waiting target. Every engagement since Midway had confirmed the same arithmetic. Ships without air cover died. The only question was how quickly and at what cost to the attacker. The operational plan Japanese Naval Command produced in response to the American invasion of the Philippines was built on this reality and attempted to use it rather than deny it. The plan was called Shogo, Operation Victory. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa would take the remaining carriers north and make enough noise to draw the American fast carrier task forces away from the landing area. While Admiral Halsey's carriers chased the decoy north, 2 Japanese surface forces would converge on Leyte Gulf from separate directions, catch the American landing fleet without air cover, and destroy it. On the level of pure concept, it was not unreasonable. It required precise coordination between forces separated by hundreds of miles. It required the decoy to perform exactly as designed. It required the American commander to leave the Gulf approaches inadequately covered when he moved north. And it required Kurita's center force, the largest of the attacking formations, to absorb whatever punishment the Americans could deliver during the approach and still arrive with enough combat power to complete the mission. The plan began failing before Kurita cleared the Philippines. On October 23rd, 2 days before the main engagement, American submarines found center force in the Palawan Passage west of the archipelago. The submarines Darter and Dace attacked before dawn and sank 2 heavy cruisers in minutes. A third was damaged badly enough to require withdrawal. Kurita's own flagship, the heavy cruiser Atago, was among those hit. He was pulled from the water and transferred to the Yamato. He arrived on the Yamato's bridge cold, shaken, and already commanding a force that had lost 3 heavy cruisers before firing a single shell at the target it had been sent to destroy. The following day, crossing the Sibuyan Sea, American carrier aircraft found him again. The attacks came in waves across the better part of the afternoon. Center Force had no air cover. The men aboard watched the American aircraft form up on the horizon and did what men do when there is nothing else available. They fired every anti-aircraft gun they had and absorbed what got through. What got through was enough to sink the Musashi. The Musashi was one of the 2 largest battleships ever built, a ship of such scale that the American pilots needed more than 20 torpedo hits and nearly as many bomb strikes before it finally rolled over and went under. It took most of the afternoon to die. The men watching from the other ships in the formation had the full length of that afternoon to observe the process and understand what it meant. At 6:45 on the morning of October 25th, lookouts on Kurita's lead ships reported contact with American vessels to the south. The silhouettes through the morning haze suggested a substantial fleet. Flight decks, screening destroyers, the profile of what appeared to be a major carrier task force. Kurita ordered general attack. The battle that followed is known as the engagement off Samar, and in its opening minutes, it looked like everything a surface action was supposed to look like when the heavier force had found its target. The battleships and cruisers opened fire at ranges the American ships could not answer. Colored dye in the Japanese shells produced columns of red and green and yellow water around the American vessels. The sea erupted in colors that looked almost decorative against the gray morning water. What Kurita did not know was that he had not found a fleet carrier task force. He had found Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was the informal designation for Task Unit 77.4.3, a formation of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts assigned to provide close air support for the Leyte Gulf landing operations. It was not a combat fleet in any conventional sense. Its carriers were converted merchant hulls, slow and thin-skinned, designed to carry anti-submarine patrol aircraft and ground support planes. Its destroyers were small. Its destroyer escorts were smaller. The entire formation displaced less tonnage than a single one of Kurita's battleships. It had no business being in the path of center force, and every man on both sides of the engagement understood this within the first minutes of contact. What happened over the next 2 hours was not supposed to be possible. Commander Ernest Evans, commanding the destroyer Johnston, did not wait for orders. He turned his ship toward the Japanese fleet, pushed to flank speed, made smoke, fired every torpedo he carried at the nearest Japanese cruiser, and kept going. His 5-inch guns were firing at ships whose main batteries outranged them by miles, and whose armor they could not penetrate. This did not stop him. The Johnston drove into the Japanese formation firing until it was surrounded, burning, and sinking. Evans went down with his ship. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. The men who survived described him standing on the bridge giving fire commands after the ship had lost all power, in a voice that sounded, according to the accounts, like a man finishing a job. The destroyers Howell and Herman followed the Johnston into the Japanese formation. The destroyer escorts Samuel B. Roberts, Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond did the same. None of them had been ordered to do what they were doing. The tactical situation that their training had prepared them for did not include destroyer attacks on battleships, for the obvious reason that the outcome of such attacks was not a tactical question. It was a mathematical one. The mathematics said they would lose. They attacked anyway. The escort carriers launched every aircraft they had. The planes were armed for ground support missions, not anti-ship strikes. When their ordnance ran out, pilots made attack runs with empty racks, diving at Japanese warships and pulling out low to break the aim of anti-aircraft crews and draw fire away from the carriers. When asked by their ships what ordnance they had remaining, pilots reported none and were told to go back. They went back. The Samuel B. Roberts was torn apart by heavy cruiser fire and sank in under an hour. The Howell went down with half its crew still aboard. The Johnston was eventually surrounded by an entire Japanese destroyer squadron and fought until there was nothing left to fight with. Through all of it, the Japanese formation could not close on the escort carriers fast enough to finish them, because every time it tried, something small and American drove at it from an unexpected direction and forced it to deal with that first. And then Kurita turned away. At approximately 9:20 in the morning, with Taffy 3's surviving ships still fighting, with several escort carriers still burning, with the entrance to Leyte Gulf 12 miles to the south, and the American landing fleet clearly visible on the horizon, Kurita ordered Center Force to break off the attack, reassemble to the north, and retire back through the San Bernardino Strait. The most powerful surface fleet Japan had assembled since the opening of the war turned around 12 miles from its objective and went home. By the time the last Japanese ships cleared the San Bernardino Strait, the accounting was already being done in operations rooms on both sides of the Pacific. The numbers were not complicated, they were simply looked at. Japan had committed nearly its entire remaining operational navy to a single engagement, and had emerged from it without achieving the mission the engagement had been designed to accomplish. The landing fleet at Leyte Gulf still floated. The American foothold in the Philippines remained. The thing Shogo had been built to prevent had not been prevented. The ships that survived returned to their anchorages and largely remained there, not because orders required it, because there was no longer enough fuel to move them, no longer air cover to protect them, and no longer a strategic situation in which moving them changed anything. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the battle with a fleet. It exited with the remnants of one. The remnants could still float, and the guns could still fire, but the thing that makes a fleet, the ability to concentrate force and contest control of the sea, was gone. It did not return. Years later, the officers who survived would remember many things only vaguely. The colored shell splashes off Samar, the sound of the Musashi going quiet across an afternoon, the smoke on the horizon that was Taffy 3, still fighting a battle it had no right to survive. But one moment remained exact. The morning of October 25th, the target visible on the horizon, the order to turn around, and the slow understanding, arriving in the days and weeks that followed, that the Navy, they had served their entire professional lives, had fired its last serious shot at a war it could no longer win. For an empire built on the idea that sacrifice and will could compensate for material disadvantage, Leyte Gulf was the morning that ended the argument.